So, today's talk's going to be on ICE high risk traffic stops. A lot of times back in my day, that was called felony stops, but nowadays they call it high risk traffic stops because if you call it a felony stop, then they feel like, well, what they're stopping you for has to be a felony, and they wanted to change it to a high risk so that they have more leeway. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but it is just the way it is. So, but I wanted to talk about it just because there's a lot of confusion out there that I see in the media. And this is partly due because the media repeats ICE talking points and they don't bother to give anyone outside of the immigration enforcement agencies an opportunity to talk, basically. They essentially ingest the ICE propaganda and then they just regurgitate it for you all. And there's not a whole lot of analysis and so forth going on, and there certainly is an analysis from people who are from right, not sycophants of the agencies, I would say. So, but that confusion is also caused intentionally by ICE, CBP, and Border Patrol, who keep many of their policies hidden under law enforcement sensitive national security bullshit seals. So that means that you can't see what their policies are because they claim that if they put these policies out for people to see, then criminals would be able to figure out how to get around them, and which is kind of ridiculous. But at any rate, so when killings and violence like we have seen lately occur, the leadership of these agencies relies on their bosses at DHS, the politicians, and the right wing media to respond with political messaging and outright lies about the facts. In other words, the leadership of these agencies hide from accountability and instead send out their talking heads like Tom Homan, who is the current border czar, and that is a political position. So I want you to remember that I'm not a lawyer and my opinions come from my criminal law degree. I have a Bachelor of Science uh, in criminal law from Auburn University a long time ago. And my experience as a former Border Patrol agent and my research and study of these agencies over the last decade. When I refer to ICE, I'm also referring to CBP and Border Patrol as they are the ones leading this mass deportation that has brought them to the middle of America and into your communities. So, what is the legal authority for immigration stops? So, contrary to this administration's beliefs, ICE does not have the authority to stop people for basic traffic violations. Immigration agents do have the authority to make traffic stops for suspicion of immigration violations, customs and narcotics violations, as well as crimes associated with terrorism within their area where they're working. They can also make vehicle stops if they see a person committing a serious felony, even though it may be outside of their legal authority. Um, An example of this would be like if they saw you run over a person, then obviously they can stop you and arrest you, and then they would call in the authorities, the local police, to come and handle that crime. They wouldn't handle it themselves. It's essentially almost like a civilian arrest, to be honest with you. So, let's see, where was I? However, immigration agents do not have the legal authority to stop people for traffic violations. Um, and if they do, that stop is considered by the courts to be illegal. If they stop you for even suspicion of driving under the influence of alcohol, that stop is not within their authorities and it will be thrown out of the courts. And I have seen that several times as an agent. So, where this gets sticky is when immigration agents work with state and local police who do have the legal authority to make traffic violation stops. After 9/11, Congress created what's called Joint Terrorism Task Force, or JTTFs. These teams were created with the concept of preventing another terrorist attack. And one of the main complaints that law enforcement had back then was that they were unable to stop the terrorist because various agencies could not communicate or share intelligence with each other. But I want to be clear that it was never that they could not share intelligence or information with each other. It was simply that they had to get a court's approval in order to do that. In other words, in plain English, that means that they had to go through the checks and balances. They had to develop a case and take it to a court and make sure a judge reviewed that. And as you've seen in immigration, they don't really like to do casework. They like to just go break down doors and do whatever the hell they want, right? So the JTTF, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, generally did away with this requirement. Additionally, this combined joint task force of federal, state, and local police meant that various agencies with different authorities were combined into one unit. This was problematic for the teams who wanted everyone on the team to have the same authorities and powers. So they were allowed by Congress to share authorities. This meant that if I, as a Border Patrol agent, happened to be on one of these joint terrorism task force with a local police department, I could engage in traffic stops for traffic violations or do what is called something like knock and talks. That's basically where you don't have a warrant, you knock on somebody's door and ask to speak to the resident, and it has to be, they have to agree to it, and it is upon their terms. So you're not supposed to push your way into that. But Border Patrol agents don't normally have those types of authorities. But if I was standing next to a police officer who did on the same task force, then I could do that. This and the 287G contracts that we see during this mass deportation with ICE are how your state and local police have suddenly gained immigration powers that they did not have before. So now you see your local cops are now immigration officers. So now they have authorities that they don't normally have. This is one way in which the immigration agents are getting around their limited authority issue. The main way ICE justifies their traffic stops is simply by racially profiling for immigration violations. And within 100 miles of any land or water border barrier, immigration agents have the legal authority to use racial profiling to conduct traffic stops for immigration purposes. While 100 miles may not seem to cover most of the United States, it does cover 2/3 of the population. And so the entire state of Maine is actually within this area that does not have full Fourth Amendment rights. This rule was recently upheld by the Supreme Court, and because Justice Kavanaugh wrote the decision, they have been termed Kavanaugh stops. According to Kavanaugh, these immigration stops are brief, non-intrusive, and living in a city where many undocumented people, in his decision, he listed Los Angeles. According to him, if you live in a city where there's many undocumented people, suspected undocumented people, that's enough reasonable suspicion for him to then say that they can pull you over simply because of the color of your skin. So in other words, if you happen to live in an area where undocumented people live, then you are also subject to these stops that violate your Fourth Amendment rights to unreasonable searches. What Kavanaugh does not consider in this decision is how these stops occur outside the confines of the cushy Supreme Court. In real life, what we are seeing under Trump's mass deportation are immigration agents using the constant sharing of these authorities to stop people based on powers they do not legally have, such as stopping people for traffic violations, not conducting immigration inspections at the scene, which is the norm, their brutality, kidnapping, and then dumping of the victims miles away. These are terrorist tactics and not legal or professional law enforcement tactics meant to create fear in the communities, and that is the plain and simple fact. Additionally, while immigration agents are trained in the academies that they need to develop their reasonable suspicion before they attempt to stop a car as the law requires of them, the training in the field differs greatly from the official training in the academies. And while agents do receive additional yearly training through their agencies, it is often incomplete and not like the academy training at all. Some of this after academy training is provided by private contractors nowadays, and they are often ex-agents or ex-police officers who are biased and not lawyers well versed in the law. This training often teaches how to get away with basically illegal stuff, and there is no oversight into this training. And since immigration agents have been allowed to do these kinds of stops for generations on the southern border without any repercussions or accountability, they expect they will be allowed to continue to do so all across the country. So, what should a normal traffic stop for an immigration violation look like versus what is really going on? Stops conducted for the purpose of immigration checks are considered routine stops. A routine stop is one in which the agent believes a civil immigration violation has occurred and not a criminal violation. It is the same type of stop done when a police officer stops you for failing to yield or crossing over that double white line. It is not a stop for a serious criminal offense, but for a civil administrative violation. The agent is to notify dispatch of their location over the radio and the description of the plate and the car. They turn on their red and blue lights, maybe give a chirp or two of their sirens, and if just in case the driver does not see them. The agent then safely exits their car and approaches the stopped vehicle from a safe angle, often from the passenger side. The agent then identifies themselves as a federal agent and asks the person to state their citizenship. If they are not a U.S. citizen, they are asked for their immigration documents, and that is it. While a routine traffic stop can escalate to a high-risk stop, the initial reason for the stop should be handled in this manner unless the circumstances change. So the pattern and practice shown in the last 18 months through analyzing court cases is that ICE has been stopping vehicles without any reasonable suspicion for immigration violations other than solely for the reason of racial profiling. The reason why I say this is because they have stated that this is exactly what they are doing, and they have not been able to provide any other reason for their stops. In the most recent killing of Johan Duran Guerrero in Maine, the young man in Maine, the agent stated he was surveilling a subject when he saw Johan drive by and decided to stop him. No reason has been given for this immigration stop other than that he looked undocumented, which is another way of saying he was brown. This was racial profiling, as this agent did not stop every car that passed him. He stopped the car with a brown driver. Neither DHS nor ICE has given a public statement as to the reasons for the stop. What they have claimed was that Johan tried to run over Agent David Brulette and then claimed the agent had to shoot and kill Johan because he was fleeing the scene and he feared for the public's safety. Note that the question of why the agent chose to stop the car is not being addressed. They do not want to answer that question because if the stop is illegal, then everything that the agent did after the stop is also illegal. That means the shooting would possibly be unjustified. The same scenario is seen in the Lorenzo Salgado Araujo ICE killing. That's a hard name for me to pronounce. Lorenzo is what I call him. In his killing that occurred in Houston, Texas during the same week. When asked why he was stopped, agents claimed they were surveilling, once again, another person when they saw him drive by in a van that was the same color as the one they were surveilling. That is some weak sauce, but a common tactic used by immigration agents, to be honest with you. It is a sort of kind of like they try and create this nexus to a real criminal and then use that to say, well, this is why I stopped him. This is why I stopped him too. So it's used to justify other unrelated stops. Oh, I was doing this at the time. So then I saw a van that looked just like it. And I decided, hey, I'm going to stop that one too. that the van looked like the van that they were targeting, even though the license plates were different and Lorenzo was not the man they were looking for. That's the reason that they gave. So when asked why he was shot, the agency then claimed that Lorenzo tried to run over the agents. And once again, they cannot justify the stop legally because it's simply a racial profiling stop. They have no justification for it. And so they go straight to the agent's life was in danger answer to justify the shooting. And that makes the press back down when you say that the agent feared for his or her life. Whenever their actions are questioned, officials immediately turn towards the agent's life was in danger to intimidate the press. Border Czar Tom Homan recently stated to Face the Nation's Margaret Brennan that the killing was justified because Lorenzo did not stop for, quote, the blue lights, and that he just needed to, quote, comply. Homan knows that it is not a justified reason for lethal use of force or even remotely legal. It's astonishing to see such a high-ranking federal law enforcement officer justify a shooting when their own use of force manuals and training they follow today strictly say failures to yield, fleeing, and simply not complying are not legal reasons to use lethal force. So how does ICE justify these legal stops in courts? Once these cases get to court, the agency will submit narratives that then fill in the legal reasoning well after the stops occurred. What this means in plain English is that the reasonable suspicion required by immigration agents to stop a vehicle is not being developed by the agents before they attempt the stop as is required by law. They are manufacturing the reasons only after the stop is done and everyone is sitting in a room together with management and union advisors getting their narrative straight. I saw this from the time I entered the Border Patrol as a very young agent and when all the way to when I resigned. And I have seen this over and over again throughout the years, studying all the immigration enforcement agencies, and I see it today in these court filings. In most vehicle stops, immigration agents make the decision to stop a car for suspicion of immigration violations based off of racial profiling alone. Most stops do not get scrutinized by the media. They do not end up in fatal shootings, and they do not end up in court. They do this all day long, every day, and have been getting away with it for generations because most of their victims do not have the resources to fight for their rights. When the stop ends up in a shooting, they ignore the reason for the stop and claim the agent feared for his life. This draws the attention away from why the stop was conducted in the first place. And special teams then come in and get rid of the witnesses, like we saw in the Renee Good shooting, where they shot tear gas at the witnesses to get them out of there. They'll confiscate any video that they can find. They lie in the court documents, as we've seen over and over again. They often deport the witnesses before they can give testimony. And then they obstruct the outside investigators, as we've seen over and over again. And then it sits in the court for years, sometimes a decade, until the media and everyone has forgotten or given up on justice. This is the pattern and practice that has served immigration agents well for generations. So let's talk about real quick the difference between felony or high-risk stops. So what we're currently seeing ICE do under this mass deportation is what is called felony stops back in my day, as I mentioned, but it's currently called high-risk stops today. A high-risk stop, as mentioned, is when the agent sees or has reason to believe the subject of the stop has committed a serious crime. An example of a high-risk stop is when an agent sees a car driving down the road and the driver is shooting out the window at people, right? Got to get that car stopped. Or maybe the license plate's going to come back to a car that was involved in a serious crime. These stops can involve ramming. They can involve what's called pit maneuvers that make them crash, where you bump them at an angle and it spins them out. And they include blocking of the vehicle after they fail to yield for your sirens and your lights. These are all things that we have seen ICE doing for suspicion of civil immigration violations. Agents exit their vehicles with their guns drawn and are supposed to have extensive training in how to conduct these escalated stops that include how to yell orders and not give conflicting orders, notifying other agents to join in the stop for backup before trying to conduct this stop, notifying supervisors to monitor the stop, being sure the agent conducting the stop is wearing a uniform that a reasonable person would recognize as a law enforcement officer, and being sure that the car conducting the stop is marked as a law enforcement car. We have seen over and over again down here on the border and other police stops that when you don't do those things, a lot of times people end up dead because they do not understand who is stopping them or for why. So I can hear you thinking to yourself that ICE is doing none of those things, and you are correct. The failure to follow these longstanding procedures is being done on purpose. The lack of uniforms, using unmarked cars with red and blue lights that can be bought off of Amazon, vests that can be bought off of Amazon as well, with police emblazoned across of it, the running up on people with guns drawn, screaming, conflicting orders, the shattering of car windows especially, it's all purposeful, y'all. The way ICE is conducting traffic stops for what are civil immigration violations is escalated to this felony or high-risk stop from the get-go. This is being done to create panic in the drivers, and it is something that is taught in the field long after they get out of the academies. Once the driver and other occupants become panicked because they do not recognize these agents as officers, because they cannot understand their confusing orders, and because they have glass shattered all over them and guns shoved in their faces, their natural human response is to flee or panic and panic. ICE then claims they fear for their lives and start shooting. So why does ICE always say that they fear for their lives when video shows their lives were not clearly threatened? Because the courts require it. In officer-involved shootings, courts demand that juries must consider the reasonable fear of the agent at the time of the event, not if a reasonable person would be in fear for their lives in that situation. By the time the cases get to court, union attorneys defending the agent will have trained them to say over and over that they feared for their lives. I have heard that a million times. Even in my book, I talk about a shooting, and I see a supervisor come to an agent who's just been involved in a shooting and said, "You fear for your life, son. You fear for your life. Remember, just keep saying that over and over and over again." They will encourage them to bring in past experiences from being in the military, their PTSD from the work, other examples of where they have seen or heard other agents being killed to justify their fear, and the courts will allow this. Whether the video shows actual danger or not, juries must consider the agent's state of mind at the moment of the shooting according to the way the law is written. This then requires juries to judge what was in the agent's mind at the time instead of what is reasonable to the average person looking at the evidence, which is standard under international law. And most juries are filled with horror stories of those few instances where agents' lives were really in danger. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen sometimes. Immigration is one of the safest law enforcement jobs you can have. It's been shown over and over again. Most of them die of COVID or car wrecks or killing themselves, quite honestly. Very, very rarely. There was one recently in Vermont that's in the courts right now. So, but it does happen from time to time, but very, very rarely. So, this makes the juries unsure of judging the agent, and the cases end up being dropped usually. So I think it's also important to note that border czar Tom Homan's response to the Johann killing in Maine was to say they needed to pause the stops and reevaluate training. That's a very serious statement from him. And according to the most recent reporting, the shooter, ICE agent David Brulette, was considered to be a career law enforcement officer, although when you really dig into it, he didn't seem to have that much of a career. in law enforcement, to be honest. He seemed to go from job to job. But he was allowed to skip the already inadequate ICE training under this administration's new hiring spree. This tells me that Homan, who is a career law enforcement officer and received the exact same training I did back in the day with the Border Patrol, believed the shooting was at the very least problematic for them. Within the same day, Trump reversed Homan's order and the dangerous stops continued. Trump claimed the stops were essential to getting criminals off the street. But here's the thing. Neither Johann nor Lorenzo were criminals. They were both within the immigration system, legally filing their paperwork and appearing before immigration officials. Additionally, 18 months of these escalated stops have yielded only 5% violent criminals, according to ICE's own statistics. 73% do not have any criminal convictions whatsoever. The vast majority of these stops are not yielding criminals like Trump claims that they are. While some claim that many in custody have pending criminal charges, such as allegations of assaulting federal agents, we see that a lot, right? What we see time and again is that ICE has lied in court documents and been forced to drop those pending charges completely. Examples of this include Mary Mar Martinez out of Chicago, Alfredo Alejandro Aljona, Julio Cesar Sosa Salis, and many, many more. So I also want to talk about the FBI announcing they were no longer investigate the killings by immigration agencies and the outrage that we're seeing by Democrats right now. It's important to know that the FBI has always had the legal right to refuse these investigations and often does so when they see that the case is problematic. They do not want to incur the wrath of sending an agent to prison. So even when they have investigated killings by immigration agents, the FBI has allowed the immigration agencies to use their own illegal evidence collection teams to determine what is evidence and what is not and how it is collected. The use of illegal immigration evidence teams is documented in HBO's Emmy Award-winning film Critical Incident: Death at the Border, a film that Democrats today still refuse to talk about. In that film, you will see how the current CBP commissioner, Rodney Scott, used these illegal teams to cover up killings by his agents when he was the Border Patrol chief here in San Diego sector. The cover-ups from back then are the exact same patterns and practices you are seeing in this mass deportation. While those illegal teams were disbanded by the Biden administration, they were quietly moved into CBP's Office of Professional Responsibility, which is their internal affairs, with zero accountability demanded by the Democrats. Scott now leads CBP and recently testified to using these exact same teams in the Alex Preddy shooting. So if you want to learn more about those teams, you can go to my Substack and look under the cover-up teams or critical incident teams, and you'll see all the analysis I've done of those cases there. So the outrage by Democrats does not make any sense to me, quite honestly, and it appears simply to be performative. The violence we are seeing today is intentional. The intentionality was proven when Homan ordered agents to tone down their violence after the chaos of Border Patrol Chief Gregory Bovino's raids in Chicago. So Chicago happens, people get really mad, then we see the shootings in Minneapolis, and then Homan's like, okay, we're going to back up. And it's like, wait a minute. This whole time you were claiming that the violence was on the part of protesters and people resisting you. And now you're saying you can control the violence, you can tone it down a bit. So that tells us that it's intentional. And the violence did die down for a while. So I guess that was good. But these killings of Johann and Lorenzo show that there has recently been an internal order to make escalated felony or high-risk stops for what are routine immigration stops. Both Johann and Lorenzo's stops should have been routine stops where immigration agents simply ask for their citizenship, check their documents, and then let them go. So the agencies want you to believe that every incident is a one-off, but the truth is that this is a large cover-up system that has been allowed to expand under both Democrats and Republicans, dating back to well before even 9/11, to be honest with you. And the system is operating just as it was designed. All right. That's all I got to say about that. Let's see if you have any questions. Oh my goodness, 141 people. That's kind of cool. Yeah, they have definitely cranked it up, PJ. And I think that quite honestly, that's simply being done for the election that's coming up. So originally, I was saying that I felt like they were going to use the escalation to then at any point during the election turn around and aim it towards Americans. And many of you said, well, they're already doing that. That's true. But they're aiming it towards people who are protesting ICE in the streets. I think it's gonna morph and be completely different. According to what Secretary, Mark Wayne Mullen, said the other day, is that they are gonna be doing election integrity enforcement, which is not within ICE, CBP, or Border Patrol's authorities. And so they shouldn't be doing that. Arlene, how you doing? If one driver pulls in front of another drive to block them, is that a crime? Thank you. Meaning if an agent pulls in front of a car to make them stop. So this we get back into the difference between a felony stop or a high risk stop versus an immigration stop. And so they're not even contemplating how they should be doing the stop. Every stop is being done violently like this. And so that tells me that the stops are illegal. That tells me that then you would have to go to court and prove, that they did this intentionally and that they damaged your property and stuff. In general, when they damage your property, you don't really get any kind of compensation out of that, none whatsoever. Have I talked to Democrats? I used to talk to Democrats a lot. In the first Trump administration, they loved me. They invite me to DC, and I'd sit in their offices. Um, And then during the Biden administration, it was crickets because I would also criticize the Biden administration for their policies as well, because they just simply continued all of this. And I have been told by Democrats privately in a whisper that CBP has the dirt on a lot of people up there. And that's one of the reasons why they don't do much. So whether it's through contracting, special contracting and favors and all this other stuff, whether it's certain congressional members who like to come down to the border and maybe have access to migrants they shouldn't have access to, that's another problem that's going on. So, yeah, they know what's going on, but they're very careful about it. I mean, Senator Padilla, who is my senator, he's actually in the HBO film, but he won't say a word about it. And his staff said that the Democrats feel that to say anything negative about and to bring up these corrupt and illegal cover-up teams would be anti-law enforcement, in their words. And they're afraid to do that. They feel that the safer way for them to do this is to go to the children's shelters and highlight that because everybody feels bad for the children. So they're just very weak. They're very weak. And they take a lot of money from a lot of contractors and donors that they shouldn't be taking money from that aren't involved, whether it's like Biden took a lot of money from Border Patrol surveillance companies. And like down here on the border, a lot of our cameras and stuff, the big towers that we have, those are all Israeli cameras from a company called Elbit. And so there's a huge problem with all of that, And speaking of Israel, like I saw today that it looks like some Democrats voted to combine our military with Israeli military and our governments, and that's kind of sad. But I mean, at first, I was telling I think Wash the other day that at first I was like, no way that can happen. There's just no way. But then I sat back and I realized that we've kind of been doing this all along down here on the border. I mean, at least at the agent level, The IDF and Border Patrol were not, like, involved when I was an agent, or I didn't see it. I heard that management was starting to get involved with Israel and going over there, but I don't have any proof of that. And then we see afterwards, after 9/11, we do see training going back and forth, and a lot of work and sharing things in between Israel and our border policies, and that's why they're so very similar. What is the rule of law when ICE pulls over or detains someone when a minor child is present? Well, the rule, I mean, obviously, it's just common sense. You should also take the child and then try and find, if they have a relative or somebody that can come and take them. If they're not gonna take the child, um, nowadays, what they do is they're giving the parents the option of taking their child, if even if their child was born in the United States and therefore is an American citizen under, birthright citizenship. They'll say, "Do you wanna take your child or do you wanna leave your child here?" There was that one case where we saw where they took the child, they deported the mother when they took the child and gave it to, like, an uncle or somebody, and they didn't do any checks, and they were saying, "Do not give this child to this uncle. He's terrible. He has a history of child abuse and this and that," and he killed that child. He tortured that child, and he killed that child, and ICE is just like, "Yeah, well, not our problem." So, but back in the day, I have never seen people treat children the way they do, and it's not to say that the Border Patrol wasn't racist and brutal back then, it was. Um, but we didn't have a lot of money and we didn't have a lot of power, and there weren't as many right-wing ideologues or Christian nationalists in it. We started seeing a lot of that targeted hiring after 9/11, and then when you get, like, up in the 2008, 2010, somewhere around in there, you start seeing that they're actively going to, like, Turning Point USA and hiring people from that. I remember right before I resigned, I was at San Diego sector headquarters, and, I was a senior intelligence agent there, and George W. Bush had just gotten into power, and he started saying, "Y'all are gonna have, you're gonna have chaplains in every sector," and I'm like, "What?" And so they started that's kind of a militarized thing, you know how you have chaplains, but you also have imams and you have rabbis in the military as well. You don't have that in the Border Patrol. We only have chaplains, right? So part of that was the courting of Christian nationalists, but also you didn't want these agents going to churches here in San Diego and learning the friendly, love thy neighbor, pro-immigrant type of Christianity that Jesus preached. You wanted them to have your type of militant Christianity, and so they created those chaplains in there, and they also did that as well so that agents wouldn't when they needed to go get counseling for the things that they got involved with or the things that they saw, because we do, as you know, see lots of the results of our deterrence policies, and it's our own fault for enforcing those laws, but it does cause trauma to the agents and so forth. They didn't want agents going outside of the agency and talking about the dead bodies that were everywhere and the children and stuff. And so they said, "You're gonna go to the chaplains." And I remember thinking I was already out as a lesbian. I was the first Border Patrol agent to come out and demand to be allowed to march in gay pride. And so I got in uniform, so I got to do that. Um, and I thought to myself when I heard that they were gonna have chaplains, I was like, "Well, that's not good." It's certainly not good for me. And so today, they're all over the place. Um, but it's interesting, a lot of our chaplains, believe it or not, well, not a some of them get, busted for, child predatory acts. So that's very common. But that is also just common in the Border Patrol, to be honest with you. So Uh, Gaza was another training ground. So I wanna be clear, I don't wanna say that, Israel is creating what we're seeing here today. There's back and forth between our border agencies, our immigration agencies, and what has been going on in Israel for a very long time, for, ever since probably before 9/11, but definitely after 9/11. So and I also wanna say too is, like, the Germans learned a lot about how to treat people, how they treated the Jews. They learned a lot from Border Patrol. So early on in the 1920s, when they started saying you have to now come across and be inspected, they would have Border Patrol agents stand there and they would delouse the migrants because the idea was that they were dirty brown people. And so we got to delouse them before they come in, right? And so what they used, believe it or not, was Zyklon B, which is the gas that the Nazis then later used to suffocate the Jews in the concentration camps. But we've learned a lot back and forth from each other. So I don't want to sit here and claim Israel made us do all this. Israel did not make us do all this. But there is a back and forth of ideas, ideologies, and the brutality that we see. Jim Crow South, too. Yep, a lot of this comes from that stuff. So yeah, the Nazis did learn from the US. The Nazis also had a lot of their own stuff there. So everybody kind of learns from each other. And I want to say, if you want to learn a lot about that history, a good follow is Andrea Pitzer, Pitzer. She's an academic, and she does a thing called Degenerate Art. She has a podcast on YouTube called Next Comes What, and it's really good. She does this kind of thing like I do where she pre-writes something and then she reads it and then, and kind of talks a little bit. But she has a book out on the history of concentration camps. She said there were concentration camps in Canada against Ukrainians. And I was like, what? I had never heard that. And she said it's something that they've done absolutely everything they can to erase in Canada. So Andrea Pitzer is a really good follow. Pitzer, Andrea Pitzer. And she's not on Substack unless somebody interviews her on Substack. Her degenerate art blog is off of Beehive. That's who she uses. That's kind of what I've been thinking about also, like doing Beehive and stuff. So, well, I mean, I hope this has been enlightening. I hope I could take a little bit of this and do, like a good little 20-minute lecture for you once a week. I was thinking, I don't know if you're aware of this, but ICE is really heavily targeting children right now in many, many, many different ways. So in any states that are blue, they are closing the migrant children's shelters, which are not good. I'm not saying they're good, but they're closing those shelters. They're not allowing them to go to sponsors and so forth. And they're moving them all to Texas. John Carlos Frey is another good follow. He does the Raid podcast. It's on YouTube and Apple as well. He is not on Substack. But John Carlos Frey was talking about that. They're also building a building somewhere where they're going to stage unaccompanied migrant children for days, where they can then put them on planes and send them back to the countries that they were trying to escape from to be safe. And they are under the guise of saying that they're claiming that Democrats gave children to predators, and they are paying local police officers about $22,000 to go do welfare checks on these children who are with family members or sponsors, and then grabbing them. And so essentially they cannot find enough criminals to deport that they are having to create criminals, like by getting rid of TPS. So people who did do it the legal way, like these two men that we were talking about, Johan and Lorenzo. So they're making people illegal, and they're making them undocumented, like overnight. So we saw this with the Haitians under TPS, which is temporary protected status. They're also doing it to the Syrians. I want to say the Cameroonians got TPS under Biden. I could be wrong. I'm sure they will do that to them. Cameroonians are African. And so I imagine that they would want to get them out as well. So what they're having to do, because they've been lying to us about how many violent criminal immigrants are in this country, they're having to make people essentially into criminals so that then they can feed them to the detention centers and get the contracts and everybody can make money. And at the same time, I was looking at Trump's, his financial release from 2025. Oh my god, that man is buying and selling stocks in these detention centers like that. Dude is making money off of this stuff. It's disgusting. Um, but unfortunately, I think a lot of people are making money off of this. A lot of people in Congress are making money, off of this. I don't know if scaffolding is gonna come back right now. I feel kinda like it's up to Lisa if she wants to bring that back, but I feel kinda like, for me right now, I really need to focus on this. I just really feel so in intelligence, we would say there's a lot of chatter. Something is going on, and there's a lot of chatter in between the professionals in this that I know, with agents that I know. Something's coming to a head, and and I feel like I need to be here and focusing and paying attention on that. So that's what Imma do. But I appreciate you all coming in, but, like, next time, I wanna focus on, like, this overall what they're doing to children and give you a better idea so that you could see the bigger picture of everything that's going on. As it is, the way media is now, they put out this story here, this story there, and it's just there's so much coming at us. So I think the best thing I could do is combine this for you and kinda give you an overall idea. And I will when I put this video out, I will have this written thing, and there are, citations in it and links in it, so you can go and check those out if you want to. And, um, and hopefully I can make this a little bit easier to understand for everybody. Okay? Alright. See y'all next time.